For 15 years, Maya had been married to a man named Tom. This was the morning she had decided to leave him. The divorce papers were folded in her bag. She had picked the day on purpose, a quiet Tuesday, early, before she had to be at the restaurant. The two of them alone in the kitchen of the little house they had bought together, back when they had nothing at all. 15 years in these rooms, she knew which floorboards creaked. She had painted these walls with him on a long weekend that now felt like another person's life. And this morning she was going to sit down at their table and ask him to sign all of it away. She had braced for a war. For 3 weeks she had practiced what she would say. She had lain awake building her arguments, lining them up like knives. All the lonely years, all the nights she came home to a dark house, all the ways she had stopped being a wife and started being the only grown-up in the room. She was ready for him to shout. She was ready for him to cry. She was ready most of all for him to ask her to stay, because that was the part she dreaded, saying no to a man she had once loved more than her own life. He did none of it. She slid the papers across the kitchen table. Tom looked at them for a long moment, and then he picked up the pen and signed his name. That was all. One quiet signature, the same neat handwriting she had loved on 100 birthday cards, and it was done. Tom, she said. She didn't even know what she meant to say after it. His name just came out of her, the way it had for 15 years. It's okay, Maya. He capped the pen and set it down, lining it up square with the edge of the papers, the way he lined up everything. You don't have to explain. I understand. And that was the strange part. He said it like he meant it. Not cold, not bitter. There was no little cruelty hidden underneath, the way there always is at the end of things. He said, I understand the way you'd say it to a friend who was moving away for a good job, like he was happy for her, like this was something he had wanted too. She had come ready to fight a man holding on. Instead, she was looking at a man who had already let go, and somehow that was worse. You cannot win a war the other person refuses to have. He had made it easy in every way a person could. The lawyer's letter had come a week before, and Maya had read it twice, sure she had misunderstood. He wanted nothing. Not the house. You should keep the house. You made it a home. Not his half of their savings. Not a single share of Juniper, the restaurant that was her whole heart. And these days, most of their money. He had drawn a line through his own name on every page and handed it all to her. Her friends had warned her it was a trick. Nobody walks away with nothing, Maya. He's planning something. But sitting across from him now, watching him fold his hands on the table, she didn't see a man with a plan. She saw a man clearing a room, so she could walk out of it without tripping over anything. He looked tired. He had looked tired for months. The headaches he waved off. The way he sometimes stopped in the middle of a sentence and had to find his way back to it. The small tremor in his hand that he hid by pushing it into his pocket. She had read all of it as one more sign of a man checking out of his own life. A husband who had quietly stopped caring about the marriage and about himself. That was why she was leaving, really. Not because he had done something terrible, because he had done nothing at all, for years, while she carried everything. And a person can only be lonely inside a marriage for so long, before being lonely outside it starts to sound like a mercy. I'll be out by the weekend, he said. I found a place. It's small, but it's enough for me. You don't have to rush. I know. He smiled at her, and for 1 second it was the old smile, the one from before, the one that had made a broke 24-year-old girl decide she would marry this man if it was the last thing she did. But it's easier this way. Quick is kinder. Trust me. Trust me. She almost laughed. She had stopped trusting him to be there a long time ago. She picked up the papers. She should have felt free. She had been waiting a year to feel free. Instead, standing in the kitchen they had painted together a lifetime ago, watching her husband sign himself out of her life without a single complaint, she felt something she had no name for. A cold thread of wrongness, pulled tight under her ribs. She told herself it was just guilt. Leaving is supposed to feel like guilt. She was almost at the door when he spoke again, so softly she nearly missed it. You did a beautiful thing with that restaurant, Maya, he said. I hope you always know it was yours. She turned. What? But he was already looking down at the table, lining the pen up with the papers again, and he didn't say it twice. She let it go. That was the last mistake she would make about Tom while there was still time to fix it. But she didn't know that yet. She just went out to her car and drove to the only place that had ever felt completely like hers, and could not understand why she cried the whole way there. The wrongness didn't go away. That was the part Maya couldn't shake in the days after she signed the papers. Not relief, not even the clean ache she'd expected, but that same cold thread of wrongness pulled tight under her ribs, the one that had started in the kitchen while she watched her husband give away his whole life without a fight. She kept hearing the strange thing he'd said at the end, "I hope you always know it was yours." She told herself it meant nothing. She almost believed it. Then Tom moved out, and the house itself began to argue with her. He left on Saturday, like he'd promised. Maya stayed at Juniper that day on purpose, until midnight, scrubbing a kitchen that was already clean, because she couldn't stand to watch him carry his life out the door in cardboard boxes. When she finally came home, his car was gone, and the house was quiet in a new way. The same and completely different. The way a room is different after someone has left it for good. He had taken almost nothing: his clothes, his books, the ugly green chair he loved that she had always hated. That was it. Everything else he had left. And worse, he had left it ready for her. The bills were stacked on the counter, sorted, each one marked in his small handwriting with the date it was due. He had set the heating to come on in the mornings because he knew she always forgot and woke up cold. He had moved her grandmother's blue bowl down from the high shelf she couldn't reach to the counter where she'd want it. The car outside had a full tank. There was food in the fridge she liked, and none of the food only he ate. It was the house of a man taking care of his wife. It was not the house of a man who had stopped caring years ago. Maya stood in the kitchen with her coat still on and felt that cold thread pull tight again. She made herself remember why she was doing this, because the house was trying to make her forget. She had met Tom when she was 24 and had nothing. A line cook with a notebook full of dreams and a bank account full of nothing. He was the one who believed her. "You're going to have your own place one day," he used to say, lying on the floor of their first tiny apartment because they couldn't afford a couch. "Juniper, I can see the sign already." He believed in the restaurant before it had a name, before it had walls. For years, his faith was the only thing she had to build on. The first thing they had ever done together, before any of it, was steal a week in a rented cabin up at Caro Sands, broke and certain and dizzy with it, planning their whole life out loud by the cold gray water. And then, somewhere along the way, he had stopped. That was how it felt to her. As Juniper grew, Tom seemed to shrink. He left his job. "To support you," he said, but he never seemed to do much supporting. He stayed home. He puttered. He let the world get smaller and smaller around him until it was just the green chair and his books and his headaches, while Maya was out in the real world fighting for both of them, alone. She hadn't fallen out of love with him. That was the part that hurt. She had just gotten so tired of loving someone who had stopped showing up. You can starve standing right next to a person. She had been starving for years, so no. The full tank and the sorted bills didn't change anything. If anything, they made her angrier. Where was this for the last 5 years, she thought. Why is the man who couldn't be bothered to plan a birthday suddenly planning my whole life for me on his way out the door? She found the first loose thread the next morning, though she didn't know yet that it was a thread, or that pulling it would unravel everything she believed about her own life. She went into Juniper early to take a delivery. Gus was there, having his usual coffee at the end of the bar. Gus had owned the building for 30 years before he sold it, and he still came in most mornings, an old man with nowhere better to be. "Heard your husband moved out," Gus said. He never softened anything. He was 80. Shame. Good man, that one. Maya gave him the tight smile she'd been wearing for weeks. "We just grew apart, Gus." Gus stirred his coffee. "Still, after what he did for this place, I always figured you two were solid as a rock." He shook his head slowly. "Goes to show, doesn't it?" Maya stopped, the order sheet in her hand. "After what he did." Gus looked up at her, and something moved across his face, the look of a man who has just realized he's stepped somewhere he wasn't meant to. "Ah, nothing," he said too fast. "Old man talk. Don't mind me." He drank his coffee and would not meet her eyes, and no matter how lightly she tried to ask again, he wouldn't say another word about it. But Maya stood in the middle of the restaurant she had built with her own 2 hands, the restaurant that was hers, the one good thing in her life that was entirely her own. And for the first time, she felt the floor of it shift, very slightly, under her feet. After what he did for this place. What had Tom ever done for Juniper, except let her carry it alone? Maya told herself to let it go. Gus was old. Old men said things. She did not let it go. because after what he did for this place had landed on a bruise she'd spent 3 years pretending didn't hurt. The memory of the winter Juniper almost died. It had been their 3rd year. Gus was finally selling the building, and the company buying it had plans. Tear out the little shops, put up something with glass and a coffee chain. Juniper had 90 days to find a new home it could never afford, or close. Maya had not slept that winter. She had cooked with red eyes and a bright smile, and waited for the end. And then the end didn't come. Out of nowhere, the building sold to someone else. A quiet investor, the agent said. Someone who liked the neighborhood and wanted to keep it the way it was. Juniper was offered a new lease at the old rent, locked in for 10 years. Maya had cried in the walk-in fridge for an hour. She had told everyone it was a miracle, a stranger's kindness, proof that if you worked hard enough and loved something enough, the world sometimes loved you back. She had built a whole story about herself on that winter. I held on. I didn't quit. I saved it. Now an 80-year-old man stirring his coffee had put a crack in the story, and she couldn't stop staring at the crack. It took her the better part of the day to find the thread between the lunch rush and the evening prep. She still had the old lease somewhere in the back office filing cabinet, in a folder gone soft with age. She dug it out and read the top of the first page. The part she had never once thought about, because when someone saves your life, you don't usually read the small print. The building wasn't owned by a person, it was owned by a company, Hartley Holdings. She typed it into her phone. A small company, no website, the kind of empty shell that exists only on paper. But the public record listed a name, the lawyer who had set it up, the man whose office handled all its business, Sam Reyes. Maya sat very still in the back office, the noise of her own kitchen carrying on without her through the door. She knew that name. Of course she knew that name. Sam Reyes had been the best man at her wedding. Sam Reyes had been Tom's roommate in college, his oldest friend in the world, the one who came to dinner twice a year and always brought too much wine. Sam Reyes was Tom's lawyer. She put the phone face down on the desk, as if that could stop what was already happening in her head. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. The company that had quietly saved Juniper, the kindness she had spent 3 years thanking a stranger for, had been set up by her husband's best friend, her husband who had no money, her husband who had no job, her husband who had stopped trying years ago and then signed away everything they owned without a single word of complaint. You did a beautiful thing with that restaurant. I hope you always know it was yours. She heard his voice say it again, soft, in the kitchen 5 days ago. And she understood now that it had not been a kind goodbye. It had been a man making very sure she would never go looking for what she was about to go looking for. Maya stood up. Her hands were not quite steady. For a year she had believed she was leaving a man who had given her nothing. She was beginning to be terribly afraid that she had it exactly backward. She didn't call ahead. If she called, Sam would have a night to think, and a careful man with time to think could build a wall she'd never get over. So the next morning Maya drove straight to his office with the name still burning in her, Hartley Holdings, Sam Reyes, and the terrible new fear underneath it, that she had been wrong about her husband, completely wrong, for years. Sam Reyes's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of old carpet and printer toner. Maya had never been there. In 15 years she had only ever seen Sam with a glass of wine in his hand, laughing at one of Tom's terrible jokes. The man behind the desk now was someone else, neat, guarded, careful in a way that told her she was right before he said a single word. Maya, he stood. This is a surprise. Hartley Holdings, she said. She watched it land, just a flicker, quickly hidden. But Sam was a lawyer, not an actor, and the flicker was enough. Sit down, he said. I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me the company that bought my building 3 years ago has nothing to do with my husband. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat, slowly, and folded his hands on the desk in a way that reminded her, painfully, of Tom. You know I can't talk about my clients, he said. He's not your client today, Sam. He's the man I divorced 6 days ago. I signed the papers. Whatever you swore to him, it's finished now. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it. Please, I just need to know what's real. Sam looked at her for a long time. Whatever he saw in her face made something in his own give way. He made me promise, Sam said quietly. Years ago, he said if you ever found out, I was to tell you it was an investor, a stranger. He was very clear about that, Maya. It mattered to him more than almost anything. He rubbed his face with both hands. He didn't want you to know it was him. Know what was him. All of it, Sam said it gently, like a man setting down something heavy. The building, he bought it so they couldn't push you out. The winter the payroll didn't clear, that was him too, quietly, so your people got paid and you never knew the account had been empty. The food writer who came that spring, the review that filled your tables for a year, that's an old friend of his, and Tom called in every favor he had left to get him through your door. He paused. Juniper was dying, Maya. 3 times. And 3 times Tom stepped in where you couldn't see him, and then made me swear to make sure you never could. Maya's legs found the chair on their own. She sat. He didn't have any money, she heard herself say. He didn't have a job. His father died 4 years ago. He left Tom everything, the house, the savings, all of it. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for a man to build a safe, comfortable life on. Sam met her eyes. Tom spent every cent of it on Juniper, on you. There's nothing left. The small place he moved into last week, he's renting. He gave away his whole inheritance, a piece at a time, over years, and made sure you'd believe it was luck. The office was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall a phone was ringing and ringing. Why, Maya whispered. Why would he do all that and let me? Her throat closed around the rest of it. Let me hate him. Let me call him a failure. Let me leave. Why would he never tell me? And here Sam, who had answered everything else, stopped. She saw it happen. She watched the lawyer who had just handed her 3 years of secrets come up against one more and refuse it. His jaw tightened. He looked down at his folded hands. That's not mine to tell you, he said. Sam. It isn't, Maya. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and that frightened her more than anything yet, because in 15 years she had never once seen Sam Reyes anywhere near crying. I've already told you more than I should have, but this last part, you need to hear it from him. His voice dropped. Go and talk to your husband, please. Don't wait. A pause. Don't wait long. The way he said it laid a cold hand flat against her heart. Sam, what's wrong with him? But Sam was already on his feet, turning toward the shelf behind him, pretending to look for something so she wouldn't see his face, and he would not say another word. Sam never answered her. He stood with his back to her, pretending to search a shelf, until she understood there was nothing more he would give her. Then she walked out of his office with the question still ringing in her ears, what's wrong with him? And no one left to ask but Tom. Maya drove. She didn't decide where. The car just went, the way it used to drive itself home from late shifts. And as she drove, 15 years rearranged themselves behind her eyes. She had always told the story one way. She was the one who fought. Tom was the one who faded. But now every memory turned over and showed her its other side, the side she had never been allowed to see. The investor wasn't luck. The review wasn't luck. And once those 2 stones were pulled out, the whole wall came down. The connections that always seemed to appear at the right moment, the supplier who gave her a break, the landlord of her first tiny kitchen who waited on the rent, the local paper that ran a story on the bright new place in town. She had thought of herself as someone the world had decided to help. She saw now, with a slow and sickening clarity, that the world had been helped along, quietly, from the edge of the room, by a man in an ugly green chair who never once asked for the credit. He hadn't faded. He had stepped back, on purpose. Year after year, he had made himself smaller and smaller, so that she would look bigger and bigger, to the world, and to herself. That was the part that took the breath out of her, because the thing she was proudest of in the whole of her life was that she had built Juniper herself, that she hadn't needed anyone. After a childhood spent watching her mother vanish into the long care of a dying man, then being let down by every other person who was supposed to hold her up, she had finally become a woman who could stand on her own 2 feet, and Tom had given her that. He had built her that, in secret, the way he'd built everything else, and then let her believe she'd done it without him. He had made her feel strong by making himself look weak. She should have felt grateful. Instead, somewhere around the river bridge she got angry, a hot, shaking anger that surprised her with its size, because he had lied. For years he had lied to her with his whole life. He had let her lie awake resenting him. He had let her feel alone in her own marriage, feel like the only grown-up in the house, feel guilty and trapped and slowly smothered. And the entire time he had known the truth and chosen every single day not to tell her. He had decided, all by himself, what she was allowed to know about her own life. Who gave you the right, she thought, gripping the wheel. Who gave you the right to decide that for me, Tom? And underneath the anger, like a current running under ice, was the other thing. Sam's wet eyes. Don't wait long. Because a man does not give away everything he owns and quietly erase himself from his wife's life for no reason. A man does that when he is getting ready to leave for good. Not the kind of leaving you do with a signature, the other kind, the kind you don't come back from. She didn't let herself finish the thought. She couldn't. She just pressed harder on the pedal. She ended up, of course, at the house. Where else was there? She let herself in and stood in the hallway and called his name out of pure habit. Tom? And the empty house gave it back to her. He wasn't there. He was at the small rented place now, the one with no money behind it, the one he'd slipped into so quietly. She would go to him. But first she needed to understand. Sam had said you need to hear it from him, but Sam didn't know Tom the way she did. Tom never explained himself out loud. He never had. If Tom had something to tell her, the deepest thing, the thing even Sam wouldn't say, he wouldn't have trusted it to a conversation. He would have written it down, and he would have left it somewhere he knew she would look one day when she was finally ready. Maya went into the bedroom, to the drawer on his side of the bed, the one she had never once opened in 15 years of marriage, because it was his. She opened it now. Inside the drawer was a folder, plain brown, the kind you buy in a pack of 10. On the front, in Tom's small, neat handwriting, was one word: Maya. Her hands were shaking now, and she didn't try to stop them. She sat down on his side of the bed, the side that had been cold for a year, and she opened it. The first pages she almost understood. The deed to the house, put in her name alone. The papers for Hartley Holdings, the building signed over to her, so that Juniper would be hers not as a tenant but as the owner forever. A letter to the bank, a list, in his careful hand, of every account and password and date she would ever need. The way you'd leave instructions for someone you weren't going to be able to answer the phone for. He had spent his last weeks not fighting the divorce, but making sure that when it was over, she would never have to worry about money for the rest of her life. She turned the page, and the world stopped. It was a letter from a hospital, then another, then the scans, gray pictures of something she didn't want to understand, marked with arrows and measurements and words she had to read 3 times because her eyes kept sliding off them. Glioblastoma. She didn't know the word. She would come to know it very well, but even without knowing it, she understood the rest, because some words need no translation. Aggressive, inoperable, median survival, and a number, written by a doctor, about how long a man had left to be alive. Months. Not many of them. Maya made a sound she had never made before. Tom was sick. Tom was not tired, not bored, not checked out, not a man who had stopped caring. Tom was dying. The headaches he waved off, the way he lost the thread of a sentence and had to go back and find it, the tremor in the hand he pushed into his pocket so she wouldn't see. Every single thing she had counted as proof that he no longer loved her had been his own body, quietly failing, while he smiled at her across the kitchen table and told her quick is kinder. She fumbled back through the pages, looking for the thing she already knew she would find and prayed she wouldn't. The date on the first hospital letter. It was from more than a year ago. He had known for over a year. He had known before the worst of the silences, before the coldest of the nights, before she had finally said the word divorce out loud and he had only nodded, like a man hearing a weather report. He had known he was dying, and instead of telling her, instead of letting her hold him, instead of giving them whatever time was left, he had spent that time pushing her away. He had used his last good year to make her believe he was nothing, so that losing him would cost her nothing. She saw the whole shape of it now, all at once, and it was monstrous, and it was the most loving thing anyone had ever done for her, and she could not tell the two apart. He hadn't given up on the marriage. He had ended it on purpose, with both hands, while it still had a pulse, so that she would walk away believing she was leaving a failure, and grieve him the way you grieve a man you've already let go of. A small, clean, survivable grief. He had tried to make himself easy to lose. He had decided, alone in a doctor's office more than a year ago, that she should not have to watch him die, and he had never once asked her what she wanted. Maya was already on her feet, the folder clutched to her chest, her keys in her hand. Before she had finished the thought, she would go to him, the small rented place, right now, tonight. She would. Her phone buzzed, a text, from Sam. He didn't tell me where he was going. He left this morning, said he didn't want you to find him like that. Maya, I'm sorry, I tried to make him stay. She stood in the empty bedroom with the folder pressed against her heart and understood that the man who was so good at disappearing had done it one last time. He had gone somewhere to die, where she would never have to watch. The letter was the last thing in the folder, under everything else, in an envelope with her name on it. She should have run straight back out to the car, made Sam call every hospital and every hotel in the county. Instead, she sat back down on the cold side of the bed, because the envelope had her name on it in his handwriting, and she had just learned how few more things in his handwriting she was ever going to get. She opened it, and she read it in his voice, the way you can't help doing with the people you've loved a long time. Maya, if you're reading this, then you went looking and you found Sam, and Sam's face finally gave me away. I always told him he was a terrible liar. He'll be very annoyed to have proved me right. I owe you the truth, so here it is. All of it. Plain. Yes, the building was me. The winter the payroll didn't clear, that was me. The man who wrote that review is an old friend who owed me a favor, and I spent it on you, and it's the best money I never had. My father's house, his savings, all of it went into Juniper, a little at a time, where you couldn't see it. I'm not sorry. It was the proudest I have ever been of anything. I got to watch you build the most beautiful thing in the world, and I got to put my hands under it where no one was looking, and hold it up. I made Sam swear never to tell you, and I need you to understand why, because it's the same reason as everything else. The reason I think you've worked out by now. I'm sick, Maya. You know that part too now. It's the kind that doesn't get better, and it's faster than I'd like, and there was never going to be a version of this where I got to be a grumpy old man in that green chair while you yelled at me to fix the gutters. I found out a little over a year ago. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, and I thought about driving home and telling you, and I want you to know I almost did. But then I saw the whole next year, clear as anything. I saw you giving up the restaurant to sit beside a hospital bed. I saw you feeding me and washing me and watching me forget your name at the end, because that's what this one does, it takes the mind last and worst. I saw your last memory of your husband being a frightened stranger who didn't know you, and I couldn't do it to you. I know it wasn't only mine to decide. I decided it anyway. I'm sorry. So I made a different plan. I made myself easy to leave. I let you believe I'd given up, because a woman can walk away from a man who's given up and not look back, and not feel guilty, and not lose too much. I wanted your grief to be a small one. I wanted you to lose a disappointment, not the love of your life. I wanted you free and strong and certain you never needed me, because soon you are going to have to not need me, and I had to know that you could. You were never carrying us alone, Maya, not for one single day. I was right there the whole time, holding the other end of everything, in the dark, on purpose. I am sorry that it made you feel lonely. That is the part I would take back if I could. The only part. Don't come looking for me. I mean it as the last kind thing I can do for you. Remember me the way you've spent this last year remembering me. A little useless, a little annoying, easy to let go. It's better. I promise it's better. Juniper was always yours. Every plate, every late night, every brave thing, that was you, and only you. I just paid the rent. Be happy, be loud, be the woman I got to watch become herself. Thank you for 15 years. They were the whole point of my life, Tom. Maya sat in the dark for a long time. The page shook in her hand. He had gotten one thing wrong, the most important thing, and he had gotten it completely, perfectly wrong, and it was so exactly like him that she laughed even as she was sobbing. He thought losing a disappointment would hurt less than losing the love of her life. But she had never been losing a disappointment. She had been losing the love of her life the entire time, slowly, in the dark, blind to it, which was the worst way of all. He hadn't spared her the grief. He had only made sure she would have to do it alone, and confused, and a year too late. Don't come looking for me. No, she said out loud, to the empty house, to the man who wasn't there. No, you don't get to do that one too. Because she knew him. That was the thing he had forgotten, in all his careful planning. You cannot live beside a person for 15 years and not learn where they go to feel safe. He wouldn't go to a hospital. He wouldn't go anywhere new and strange. A man who wanted his last memories to be good ones would go to the place where they had been happiest, back at the very beginning, before Juniper, before the money, before any of it. The little rented cabin at Caro Sands, where a broke girl and a boy who believed in her had spent one perfect week deciding to spend their lives together. He'd gone home, not to a house, to a week. Maya picked up her keys. Faro Sands was 4 hours up the coast. Maya drove it in the dark, the folder on the passenger seat where a person should have been. For the first hour she was only angry. For the second hour, something harder happened. She began to wonder if he was right, because she could see it, the way he must have seen it in that parking lot. She could see the year he had been trying to save her from. She had watched her own mother nurse her father through the long bad ending. She had watched it hollow her mother out, watched the illness eat not just the man but every good memory that came before him, until her mother couldn't picture her husband young and laughing anymore, only old and afraid. Maya had been a child and she still remembered her mother's face at the very end, not grief, something worse than grief, something scraped empty. Tom knew that story. She had told it to him years ago, crying in the dark, and he had taken it and built his whole terrible plan on top of it, because he loved her, and he did not want that face to become hers. Maybe he was right. Maybe the kind thing, the loving thing, really was to let him have it his way, turn the car around, let him go quietly, the way he wanted, keep the small, clean, survivable grief he had worked so hard to give her, be free. She drove another mile, thinking about it honestly, because she owed it to him to think about it honestly. Then she said, out loud, no, because here was the thing he had never understood. For all his planning, he kept trying to spare her the cost of loving him, but the cost was not the price you paid for love. The cost was the love. The washing and the feeding and the sitting by the bed and the holding on while he forgot her. That was not the bill that came due at the end. That was the last and truest part of the whole thing. The part she had spent 15 years earning, the part that was hers. He didn't get to pay it for her. He didn't get to protect her out of her own goodbye. He had spent his entire life carrying the far side of everything so she would never feel the weight. And she understood now that the weight had been the point. The weight was the marriage. He had been so busy making sure she never had to carry anything that he had robbed her of the one thing she would have given anything to carry. Him, to the end, however bad the end. You decided I couldn't survive losing you, she thought. You were wrong. The thing I can't survive is being protected out of the only life I wanted. The rain started somewhere past the third hour, fat drops bursting against the windshield, the sea somewhere off to her right in the black. She didn't know if the cabin was even still standing. She didn't know if he'd be there, or if she'd guessed wrong, or if she would find him already too far gone to know her. She didn't know if there was time. Sam's voice kept saying don't wait long, and she pressed harder on the pedal and prayed to a God she had stopped speaking to years ago. Please, let me be in time to choose. Let him not have taken that from me too. The road turned to gravel. The headlights swung across pine trees, and then water, flat and black and endless, and then a light. One small yellow window, low to the ground, exactly where a 15-year-old memory said it would be. The cabin was still standing, and someone had the lamp on. The door wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. There was nothing out here to lock it against, and a man who has come somewhere to die does not bother with the locks. Tom was sitting in a chair by the window, a blanket over his knees, looking out at the black water. He was thinner than the last time she saw him. How had she not seen it? How had she let herself not see any of it? And there was a bruise of tiredness under his eyes that no amount of waving off could hide anymore. But he turned when the door opened, and his face when he saw her was the most naked thing she had ever watched happen to a person. Shock, then joy, helpless and total. And then, fast, the shutter coming down, the old gentle deflection sliding back into place. Maya, he even smiled. You're a long way from home. Don't, her voice came out wrecked. Don't you dare, Maya, you're a long way from home, me. Not now, not anymore. He looked at the folder in her hand, and his shoulders dropped, just slightly, the way a man's do when the thing he's been running from finally catches him. I asked you not to come. I know, I read your letter. I read the whole thing. She crossed the room. You bought my building. You saved my restaurant 3 times over. You gave away your father's house, every last penny, so that I could feel like I'd done it all by myself. Her voice was climbing, and she let it climb. You found out you were dying, and you decided, by yourself, that the kindest thing you could do was make me believe I'd married a man who wasn't worth crying over. So I'd leave, so it wouldn't hurt. Yes, Tom said quietly. Did it work? No. The word broke in half. No, you idiot. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And then she was on her knees beside the chair, her face pressed into the blanket over his poor thin legs, crying the way she hadn't let herself cry in the car, in great ugly waves, and his hand came down onto her hair, light and shaking, the tremor she had spent a year mistaking for a man who didn't care. "You were supposed to remember me as nothing," he said above her, and his voice wasn't steady anymore either. "That was the whole plan, Maya. I worked so hard on it. It was a stupid plan. It was a good plan." A wet laugh. Sam said it was a good plan. Sam was crying in his office this afternoon. "Your good plan made everyone cry." She lifted her head and looked at him, and she made herself say the thing she had driven 4 hours through the rain to say. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to decide for me what I'm allowed to carry. I'm not my mother in a parking lot, and I'm not a problem you solve quietly in the dark. I'm your wife." She pressed his trembling hand flat against her wet face. "You held up the other end of everything my whole life and never let me feel the weight of it, and I spent this last year thinking I was alone because of it. Don't you see? The weight was mine. This," she gripped the folder, the scans, the months a doctor had counted out. "This is mine too, whatever's left of it. I want it, all of it. The bad part most of all." Maya. His eyes were streaming now, openly, the careful man finally all out of careful. "It's going to be ugly. At the end I won't know you. That's how it goes. I didn't want that to be the last thing you—" "Then I'll know you," she said. "I'll know you enough for the both of us. I'll know you even when you can't know yourself. That isn't the cost of loving you, Tom. That's the whole gift of it, and you tried to steal it from me." She kissed his knuckles. "I am never going to fully forgive you for that, and I am staying anyway, both of those things, forever." He was quiet for a long time, his thumb moving against her cheek. "I divorced you," he said at last, helplessly. 6 days ago. You signed the papers. I made very sure of it. You're not even my wife anymore." Maya laughed, a soggy, furious, helpless laugh, and stood and wiped her face with both hands and looked down at the man she had married twice now, once at 24, in a borrowed dress, and once again tonight, on her knees on a cabin floor, choosing him on purpose, with both eyes wide open. "Then ask me again," she said. He asked her again. Not that night. That night they only slept, him in the chair and her on the floor with her head against his knee, because neither of them could stand to stop touching the other long enough to go and find a bed. But a few weeks later, at Juniper, after closing, with Sam as the witness and the kitchen staff for guests and old Gus crying into his coffee at the end of the bar, Tom asked her again and she said yes again, and they didn't bother with the paperwork. They'd both had enough of paperwork to last a lifetime. And then they had the year. It was not a film. Maya made herself remember that, afterward, when people tried to turn it into a beautiful story. It was not beautiful, most of it. It was hard, and it was frightening, and it got worse exactly the way the doctor's letter had promised it would. But it was hers, and it was honest, and that was the thing he had tried to deny them both, and the thing she had driven through the rain to take back. She did not give up Juniper. He wouldn't let her, and she didn't want to. She simply brought him along. He sat at the corner table by the window, his table, in the ugly green chair he'd taken with him when he moved out, hauled back now to Juniper by 2 of the boys because she did not care how it looked. On the good days he watched her work and told terrible jokes to the regulars. On the bad days he just watched. On the worst days he slept while she cooked, and woke, and looked up, and found her still there. They did the small things he'd been so certain she should never have to do. She learned which pills came when. She learned to read the weather of his headaches before he did. On the weekends he was strong enough, she drove him up to Caro Sands, and they sat by the black water where the whole thing had started, and not once, not for a single hour of it, did she feel the small, clean, survivable grief he had worked so hard to leave her with instead. She felt the other kind, the enormous kind, the kind you only get to feel about the love of your life, and she would not have traded one single terrible day of it for all the easy, empty years he'd tried to hand her. Near the end, it went the way he had been most afraid of. There were mornings he woke and looked at her like a kind stranger, and asked, very politely, who she was. The first time, it broke something in her that she hadn't known was still there to break. But she had made him a promise on a cabin floor, and she kept it. "I'll know you enough for the both of us." On the mornings he didn't know himself, she knew him for him. She told him who he was. She told him he was a man who had loved a girl so much that he tried to disappear so she would never have to miss him. She told him it hadn't worked, that she'd found him anyway, that she found him again every single day. Some mornings he believed her. Some mornings he just held the hand of a stranger who was being kind to him. Either way, she stayed. He died in the spring, at home, in the bad green chair they'd carried back from Juniper for the end, with the window open and her hand in his and her voice in his ear, telling him one more time exactly who he was. Juniper is hers now, truly hers. She owns the building, the one he bought in secret so that no one could ever take her dream away. She knows the truth of every brick of it now, and the truth is not that she built it alone. The truth is that a man held up the other end in the dark for 15 years and never once asked her to thank him, and then gave her one last year of letting her finally see his hands. People still tell her she did a beautiful thing, building this place all by herself. She doesn't correct them anymore. He'd want her to keep the credit. He fought too hard and gave up too much for her to have it. But late at night, after close, when the chairs are up on the tables and the kitchen has gone quiet, she sits at the corner table by the window, in an ugly green chair she will never throw away, and she lets herself know what it cost and what it was worth. The year he tried to take away from them both was the best year of her life. He had been so sure it would be the worst. He was wrong about that. The way he was wrong about so many of the things he decided, alone because he loved her. It was the last good year, and it was good because in the very end he finally let her carry the weight.